Have you ever settled into your seat to watch a classic Western, captivated by the sight of a stagecoach cutting through the desert? On screen, the carriage glides under golden skies, driven by a brave coachman, while passengers from opposite worlds exchange curious glances and dust swirls in the wind. But the movies leave out almost everything. The stagecoach that traveled American roads in the 1800s wasn't about glory. It was about exhaustion, dust, and constant fear. In this video, we'll flip through the journals of anonymous travelers and examine receipts from old transportation companies to piece together what happened on the inside. Hard benches that punished your back, windows caked with mud, lightning-fast stops at inns with no clean water. While Hollywood pins all the danger on a gunslinger's trigger, real life brought more mundane threats. Fever, falls, storms that turned trails into swamps. And of course, robberies didn't come with trumpet soundtracks. They were quick, dirty, and deadly. Curious why anyone would pay a fortune for such a punishing experience. In the next scenes, we'll break down prices, routes, and the logistics that tied entire towns to this service. Buckle up, with worn leather straps, not seatbelts, and come with us on this journey beyond the myth. If the harshness of the Old West sparks your interest, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The road is long and there's still plenty of dust ahead. On screen, the stagecoach shows up as the setting for unlikely encounters. A quiet stranger, a lady on the run, a gunslinger looking for redemption. The camera reveals a curious, almost cozy interior, where sharp dialogue and tense silences are born. Every bump in the road becomes an excuse for gunfire, bold moves, and heroic gestures. The blueprint came from John Ford's Stagecoach, but it spread like dust on afternoon reruns, until every viewer linked creaking wood with adventure. The real journey, though, crossed a very different desert. Dirt and stone roads beat up wheels and backs. Narrow benches squeezed bones for days, with no chance to stretch your legs. Dust stuck to sweaty skin, clogged nostrils, and mixed with the sour stench of unwashed hides. Drinkable water came in rationed sips. Food arrived cold or spoiled. Fevers, diarrhea, and accidents were part of the ticket price. For every grand ambush filmed in Hollywood, hundreds of travelers were just fighting for a slightly less miserable seat and the hope of making it alive to the next stop. Even so, in that wooden box rattling through deserts and mountains, people carried a belief in a country that stretched beyond the horizon. It was that belief, not comfort, that kept the vehicle moving, and that Hollywood, decades later, would turn into a myth of individual bravery, scrubbing out the mud, the fear, and the relentless creaking that came with every mile. In the mid-1820s, craftsmen from New Hampshire introduced the Concord coach, a stagecoach that quickly became an icon of American roads. Bright paint, rounded lines, and most of all, a suspension made of wide leather straps that made the cabin sway like a cradle. On the well-kept routes of the East, this swaying softened potholes and gave the vehicle a reputation for a smooth ride. It was so successful that the design changed very little over nearly 75 years. That reputation, though, took a hit every time the coach left the solid gravel and hit the rough trails of the interior. Inside, there was just over a meter of width and height. 6, 9, or even 12 passengers squeezed in shoulder to shoulder, knees locked. When demand was high, daredevils would ride on the roof or hang off the sides, adding to the weight and the noise. The leather straps didn't work miracles. As soon as the driver picked up speed, everyone slid forward together into a human pile at the front. A sudden stop sent the same pile crashing to the back. Mark Twain, a sharp-eyed passenger, once described the moment when one of those straps snapped under a load of stuffed mailbags. To keep the swaying from shattering glass, the windows on Western models were replaced with canvas curtains. That solved the shards, but let in clouds of dust in summer and biting wind in winter. Mail took priority and was stacked within the driver's reach, stealing precious inches from the already tight space for people. Anyone buying a ticket wasn't looking for luxury. They were buying the chance to cover miles of nothing faster than any regular wagon. relying only on their own endurance and the steady creaking of the leather straps that, for the moment, held up their hope of reaching the next relay station. As the stagecoach jolted over packed dirt, every mile confirmed that traveling through the West in the 19th century was a true test of endurance. Roads were usually no more than ruts carved out by the wheels of earlier wagons. One good rain turned them into mud trenches, one dry day into choking dust. In flooded stretches, the solution was to line up logs, the dreaded corduroy road. Charles Dickens, after crossing one, wrote that he felt his bones shift places, and that feeling was no exaggeration. Speed almost never topped 12 miles an hour. On long routes, it dropped to less than 12 a day. A trip that would take an afternoon today could stretch into 3 days of bone rattling. Inside the coach, comfort was a fantasy. Passengers shared hard benches with sacks of mail that flew like projectiles with every bump. Outside, there was no break from the burning heat, the soaking rain, or the numbing cold. Swarms of insects completed the misery. Even so, the ride almost never stopped. Stretches ran for 22 hours straight. Changing horses was a rush job. Travelers barely had time to gulp down some thin broth before being shoved back into their seat. When the road sloped upward, the driver made everyone get out. Time to push the coach uphill or walk to give the worn-out team a break. Miles later, everyone squeezed back in, hoping the next stop would come before the last thread of energy gave out. Between St. Louis and San Francisco, this brutal cycle repeated for 25 days. Every jolt reminded you that the frontier started long before the horizon. It began right there, inside the shaky stagecoach, where body and mind were forced to learn the art of hanging on. Stops along the line were too short to be called rest. At relay stations, the driver barely jumped down from the seat, swapped out the horses, and got the signal to roll again. The main stops, set up in family homes or inns, promised comfort, but let people down. Bland meals, crowded beds, visible grime. Dreaming of a hot cup of coffee was pure fantasy. The Butterfield schedule was ruthless. 10 minutes in, the horn sounded and everything went back to bouncing down the road. The food was a constant complaint. Bacon, ham, and the never-ending dried apple pie came at banquet prices. Smart passengers hid cheese and bread in their saddlebags. The rest had to put up with the mood swings of tavern keepers used to customers with no options. One traveler griped about the dust mixed into the biscuit dough and was told everyone has to eat a peck of dirt. He shot back that he didn't plan to do it all in one bite. Hygiene was shocking, especially to Victorian ladies. Watching the cook pet the dog and then plunge her hands into the flour felt like a nightmare. At night, things only got worse. Women squeezed into tight rooms. Men shared worn-out mattresses, 2, 3, sometimes 4 to a bed. Strangers' bodies all fighting for space. The stations, supposedly a haven, became just another obstacle on the journey. A reminder to every passenger that the hardest part was still having to keep going. The visible discomforts of the journey were just the surface of something worse. With no latrines, every stop forced men and women to sneak off to the roadside, shielded only by sparse bushes. A bath? Only at the horse trough. A line, a dented cup, the same rough towel, and a toothbrush that went from hand to hand. So fleas, lice, and bed bugs became regular passengers. Inside the stuffy stagecoaches, the smell of unwashed bodies competed with a symphony of coughing. That's where the real danger hid, more than in the canyons. 9 out of 10 deaths on the trails came from disease. Cholera drank the same water as the pioneers and returned corpses in less than 24 hours. Dysentery stained the ground red. Typhoid, measles, flu, tuberculosis, and the dreaded mountain fever spread unchecked. Anyone who got sick had to rely on teas, poultices, and hope. Scientific medicine was still crawling. Germs were just a rumor. The official villain was something called bad air. Even so, the wagons kept rolling, carrying the sick and the healthy side by side, crammed into tight quarters and clinging to the same stubborn drive to reach the west, before the next outbreak opened new graves along the trail. When the movies take us to the Old West, the sound of revolvers steals the show. But in real life, more people fell victim to loose bolts than duels. On the dusty stagecoach routes, a cracked axle or a spooked horse was all it took to wreck everything. With such a high center of gravity, the coach tipped like a barrel at the smallest hole, wood splintering and passengers trapped in the wreckage. The trails, rushed into place, turned to mud pits in winter and wagon-rattling ridges in summer. Crossing a river sounded simple, until the makeshift bridge gave out, sweeping the coach, cargo, and people downstream. Exhausted drivers, or ones a little too bold after a few swigs of whiskey, tried to make up for lost time by flying downhill, only to find out no brake could handle that much weight on iron wheels. Even when the parts held up, slow turns brought a different kind of suspense. Voices could rise out of the brush at any moment, demanding the strongbox. Between 1870 and 1884, Wells Fargo messengers logged nearly 350 robberies. The bandits studied the schedules and picked stretches where the coach had to slow down. Some, like the polite Black Bart, recited poetry before collecting the gold. Others shot first and talked later. To even the odds, companies reinforced the cash boxes and hired guards with double-barreled shotguns. But a lot of times, the best choice was to hand over the bag and stay alive. Hollywood still shows native attacks in perfect circles, arrows flying from all sides. In reality, those clashes were less common and a lot more complicated. They came from land disputes, hunting conflicts, or as a response to broken promises. The targets were cattle and supplies, hardly ever the passengers. To make things worse, crimes committed by masked white men were often blamed on tribes, stoking fear and justifying revenge. Looking at the full picture without the old filters shows that on the prairie, the real danger rarely had the glamour of a movie poster, but it was always lurking in the creak of a wheel, the snap of a bridge, or the raspy voice breaking through the dark. The journey on wheels revealed, above all, human fragility. Inside the jostling box, every face showed a feeling: fear of a robbery, the numbness of endless hours, the fatigue of bodies that couldn't stretch out. Danger didn't knock. It rode along, reminding everyone that one bump or one nod from the driver could lead to disaster. Between two stops, the scenery changed little, but the tension changed a lot. A whisper could spark an argument. A nudge of the elbow could turn into a fight. To keep things cool, companies posted almost comical notices. Save the bottle, spit with the wind, don't snore, treat the ladies with respect, stay calm when the gang shows up. And please, no theology or political campaigns. Too explosive for a space already packed. Outside, the driver was an almost legendary figure, able to handle 6 horses on cliffside trails. Even so, he earned modest pay and carried memories of co-workers lost on brakeless descents. Next to him, an armed messenger guarded the strongbox. First target in any ambush, last to get any thanks. Inside the coach, the mix was unlikely. A sergeant shared a bench with a pharmacist. A maid listened to Latin from a priest. A miner dreamed of gold nuggets while an aristocrat counted the hours. Passengers weren't the main business. For the companies, the gold and mail in the back compartment paid for the trip. People were extra. Even so, every ticket sold brought a new story. Some were looking for treatment for a cough, others running from debt, many chasing rumors of fertile land. All of them learned that the real fare cost more than money. It was paid with anxiety, silence, and the patience to accept that the rising sun only meant the start of yet another stretch, with no guarantee of arrival. The 19th century stagecoach journey in the United States lays bare the gap between the epic adventure Hollywood packaged with dramatic soundtracks and the real experience of those who braved the dirt roads. In the movies, you get glowing orange sunsets and witty dialogue. In the journals from the time, it's mostly long hours jolting on hard benches, sharing inches of space with strangers and breathing dust that clung to sweaty skin. The non-stop swaying wrecked your joints. Rain soaked the blankets, and food, hurriedly served at makeshift inns, showed up cold or bland. Every mile raised the stakes. Wheels snapped in ravines. Robbers ambushed unguarded stretches, and cholera outbreaks loomed over newly built settlements. Still, men, women, and children kept moving forward, driven by promises of land, profit, or simply the lack of better options. At every stop, exhausted faces exchanged knowing glances, sharing the fear and the hope of reaching a better tomorrow. Seeing that reality, so far removed from movie glamour, makes the human feat even more impressive. The West wasn't built by flawless heroes, but by everyday people willing to endure extreme discomfort to carve out new opportunities. And you, what detail of this journey stood out the most? Was it the cramped cabin, the constant threat of attack, the rough state of the roads, or the shadow of disease that could strike at any stop? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective adds to the conversation. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the behind the scenes of the Old West, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next chapters where we break down the stories fiction chose to soften. Thanks for riding with us all the way to the end.